Call this joint city council planning and commission meeting for April 6th, 2024, regular special session to order, and I asked for a roll call from Lisa.
Newman.
Here.
Paul.
Here.
Shields.
Here.
Wilmot.
Here.
Walker. Present. McSweeney.
Here.
Wagner. Sorry. Buck.
Here.
Horn.
Here.
Iko Angeli.
Here.
Meridian.
Here.
And Mr. Murphy.
Present.
Carolyn. Here.
Just a brief comment before we get started. There's stuff in the hallway. Feel free, this is very informal. Feel free to get up, grab yourself a drink or a snack, go to the restroom. Certainly appreciate the investment of your time this morning. It's a beautiful morning. I'm sure you have a lot of things on your to-do list today, so we will try to get through our items as quickly as possible, but we also want to really dive in and kick off this process. As you know, we received a $50,000 rural readiness grant to allow us to really look at our zoning that dates back to the, I don't know, 70s-ish, late 70s. So if you can imagine life back then, probably a little different priorities today than maybe there were in the 70s, maybe in some cases, maybe not. But I think with these funds, I think it's a good opportunity for us to kind of take a step back, look at potentially those barriers that we have in our current zoning that are not allowing us to move forward with some of our affordable workforce housing priorities. So this kind of will kick off that grant, and the grant is actually goes until January of 26. So that's our kind of our deadline to get this work accomplished. So it'll require a lot of discussion, a lot of meetings, and a lot of intentional community engagement, which is obviously part of the process, and we certainly value that. So again, this kind of kicks off our discussion. I'll turn it over to John. He's going to run through kind of a presentation talking about trends and tools that we have within hopefully you all have a copy of the housing reform toolkit. If not, certainly we can get that. I think I sent it out electronically. We can certainly make hard copies for those that need it or want it if you don't have it, but that's kind of going to be our guide, if you will, as we go forward. So I'll turn it over to John and he can kind of start, and then obviously once we're through the presentation, we'll open it up for your discussion and input, and hopefully that'll help develop a game plan going forward on how we proceed.
Thanks, Shane. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I think this is an important kickoff meeting. And I put together like a 5.5 hour PowerPoint slideshow for everybody. Yeah, that's it. No, the zoning ordinance is a regulatory and legislative document that really is the implementation of the community master plan. That's the primary tool to implement the plan. Few people really think about it this way, but the zoning ordinance is also a policy tool, because embedded into the zoning ordinance is public policy relative to how the community wants to proceed with its development and redevelopment. As a kickoff to the process, we have prepared a zoning website for the City of Petoskey zoning ordinance. It's been populated with a lot of different documents that talk about trends, publications that we think are just important public documents for people to read, to get a better understanding about what's going on in the United States relative to, and in Europe relative to zoning and how the regulatory tools are used. Going into this process, as I've talked to the Planning Commission, I don't have any preconceived ideas. I've talked in generalities with the Planning Commission in regards to taking a look at some things within the ordinance, maybe of concern. Lisa, who is the zoning administrator, since taking over that position, and even before, Lisa is pretty familiar with some of the the nuances of the current code and areas that we have gray areas that we sometimes have interesting conversations in terms of how to interpret provisions. So we're kind of keeping an internal list of things that we think are just administrative issues that we need to resolve as part of the revision process. As we go through the slideshow, I'm going to try to highlight some of the major trends. As Shane mentioned, this is informal, so it's primarily a conversation of where everybody thinks the zoning should go in the future and what some of the issues are in the community that maybe need to be resolved as part of the rewrite. The areas of I'm not seeing my slide.
It's just to enter.
I did. I'm hitting enter and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, so okay, so it's a little bit like.
Minimize that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh.
You didn't see it over here.
No, you can't see it on that one. I can't get it to.
Is it over to the right above that? Up there?
View options.
Yeah. To the left.
What's that? Just this one.
You go to view options at the top of the slide. There you go.
Thank you. Can't see for now. Well, it says it's on full screen.
If you hit that OK button, that blue OK button, and then that, yeah, and then you can be able to. Yeah, that view options bars.
Okay, sorry, guys. Thank you.
Yeah.
Then,
Control minus maybe to reduce the screen size.
there.
There we go. All right, some of the discussion outlines are things that are being talked about when communities are revising. These are the 18 areas that I've got some slides on in terms of a variety of different issues that we'll discuss as we go through the code. Okay, there's just a little bit of a lag time.
Oh, thank you.
The first thing that, we've had some brief conversations with the planning commission on this item is at least taking a look at the current zoning districts to see if there are any zoning districts that need to be collapsed into each other. And as a point of information, before I forget, over on the table in the corner, I printed it out for everybody on council and planning commission, a 30 by 40 copy of the inch copy of the zoning map. So you can have your own zoning map, which is at a larger scale. So you can see a little bit more definitively what areas and neighborhoods are zoned. Currently, the city has 20 different zoning districts. You have 5 residential, 8 commercial, 2 industrial, 2 hospital, 1 college, 1 park reserve, and 1 PUD. The map over next to Shane by the one screen is a zoning map that just has the has 5 of the 8 of the business districts that are located in the community. One of the reasons for discussing the opportunity to evaluate the districts is that the city of Petoskey zoning code is based on a model that was actually emanates back from 1929 when the Department of Commerce, the U.S. Department of Commerce, put in place the zoning enabling model for the United States. And part of that model was based on Euclidean zoning, which is basically also based on a pyramid. So for example, you go to the zoning code and uses that are in like the R1A district, you go to the R1B, it says all the uses that are in the R1A. And as you go through some of the business districts, some of the uses in the B1 are allowed in the B2, and the B2 they're allowed in the B3. However, in some circumstances in the B3, the permitted uses in the B2 now are special land uses. And by the time Lisa and I go through trying to figure out what, if it's permitted or special, we've got a rather complicated chart of trying to figure out exactly what's going on. So what some communities are now doing is each of the zoning districts per se stand on their own. So if somebody comes in to City Hall and says, I have a piece of property that's zone B2, then they can basically be given a sheet of paper that says these are all the uses in the B2 district that are permitted or special land use. And these are some of the special conditions and dimensional requirements that need to be applied, period. There's no trying to figure out going through the having a Rosetta Stone to try to figure out exactly what the zoning code says. All right. So that's one of the ideas is to take a little bit deeper dive into each of the districts, find out what some of the commonalities are. I didn't bring it with me today, but at the planning commission meeting, I handed out a really simple matrix by each of the districts with all the uses, and you can see going across the lines that some of the uses just transfer from district to district to district to district. So we've got a little bit of work there to do. So that's collapsing the districts. I will show you that across the bay, as an example, in the city of Harbor Springs, they've been going through their zoning code really since the late part of 2022. They're in the final adoption stages. They went from 17 districts down to 9. And one of the areas where most of the districts were consolidated were in the residential zoning districts. They had around 5 or 6 zoning districts that were residential in character. And really, in many of the cases, the only difference in the districts were the dimensional requirements. So they were able then to consolidate some of the districts on the map, and make them a little bit more legible and easy relative to the overall community, and also based on their master plan. This slide here is a little bit more complex, but it shows what's currently happening. This is a much larger community than Petoskey. This is the city of Novi, 60,000 people. They currently have 28 zoning districts. And when you look at their zoning map on the far left, it's very difficult on a parcel by parcel basis, or even from the planning commission, to get an idea of what the land use patterns in the community are because of the variety of the districts, and they're very finite in size. But when we collapse them down into various categories, like grouping all of the residential together versus all of the commercial, you can actually see a development pattern in the community. You can see what areas in broad-based way are designated for residential in the light yellow, areas that are commercial in red, and areas that they have reserved for research and office facilities. So it makes some sense to really get an idea of what the underlying districts are relative to your future land use map, to make sure that there's some consistency between the future land use map and what the zoning map have to say. Now, that's important because if there's a significant divergency between the master plan and the zoning ordinance map, that is pretty much your gap for potential litigation. So you want to make sure that there's some degree of consistency and alignment. So that's part of the process of going through the review of the zoning districts. As I had mentioned, this is an example of how you can simplify the code. These are program sheets that actually have the they talk about the district, the purpose of the district, the regulated uses within the district, and what the distinguishing characteristics are. Because there is a little bit easier to read than a 300-page zoning document in terms of getting a quick idea of what the intent is of the district. So before I move on to the next topic, I just, as the manager had mentioned, this is an informal meeting. I really want to explore with both the PC and the city council and the community that's either here in person or on Zoom. What some of the expectations are, what some of the issues are, ideas, thoughts, as we go through these to, so the planning commission has an idea of what, I'd like the planning commission to have an idea of what city council expectations and policies are, and get an idea from the community relative to their expectations too, relative to what they see as issues that need to be resolved in the code. So with that said, I'll just open it up. Anybody have any thoughts, or has anybody had any issues relative to the current districts that we have in the city of Petoskey that need to be evaluated in more detail?
John, when you consolidate districts, do you assume that the most permissive district then applies to everything, or how is it decided? Let's say, talking about setbacks. You've got 3 residential districts that have different setback requirements, and if you're going to consolidate those into one residential district, you basically go with the most permissive requirements.
That's a good question.
Because, you can't really impose a more permissive requirement on a less permissive situation.
That's right. And the way that it's been resolved is that a couple of ways. One, you take a look at the historical development pattern of the community. Secondly, you take a look at your not the minimum lot size that's in the zoning ordinance, but your actual minimum lot size in the community. All right. What's happened over the years is, even before we had data processing or word processing, there was a lot of cutting and pasting from different ordinances. Somebody like, oh, geez, I liked how they resolved that. We're going to copy that and we're going to put that in our code. What's happened over the years is some of the minimum lot requirements really don't have any basis on the historical development pattern in the community. So they don't line up. So many lots are non-conforming. But to get at your question, there's 3 components to minimum lot size. There's the front yard setback, there's the rear yard setback, and then there's the side yards. And the way that it's being done is the rear yard setback is usually set up primarily if the block has access to an alley, or if there are utilities that run historically in neighborhoods that had alleys. That's where the electric lines ran and stuff like that. So the rear yards usually average between 25 to 35 feet deep. All right. And that's the backyard. So, I mean, people really don't have too much of a concern about what the rear yard setback is. The front yard setback in today's world, based on the fact that Petoskey is basically a built out community, the front yard setback can be based on the average of the setbacks in the block. So it provides a little bit of flexibility. So every single house isn't built to the 25-yard front yard setback line. There's some flexibility in terms of, and that's historically how neighborhoods were built. We found that if you use a percentage, and that percentage is the side yards are 12% of the lot width, or 8 feet, which is ever greater, you basically standardize the sides at 8 feet. And then as the lot width increases in width, the side yard increases proportionately. So you can have a mathematical model that basically says if you have a 60-foot lot, this is what your setback is going to be. If you have an 80-foot lot, this is what the setback is going to be. So the dimensions, regardless if it's a large lot or a small lot, are all proportionately the same. And then you don't have to really worry about what all the different uses are in each of the districts.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, if you take a look at the Sanborn fire map, which was, they have a couple iterations here in Petoskey. I think the first one I found was right at the end of the like around 1895. I found one in 1905. Actually, Lisa and I used one. And that was 1905 to take a look at lot splits on Madison Street. Because we actually found over on Madison Street, 3 or 4 of the lots on Madison that wanted a lot split because they had houses in the backyard and they wanted to sell the lots off individually. And the people were thinking that if they sold the smaller lots individually, the cost would be less than some of the people that live there, like some nurses and school teachers would be able to afford it, and they have sold. But what we found on the Sanborn map is that the dwellings were there in 1905. So today people are talking about accessory dwelling units, but hey, historically, town already had accessory dwelling units in the back of the lots. So taking a look at the historical development patterns, we can kind of craft out what the dimensional requirements could be in some of the districts. So that's one way of taking a look at it. Any other questions?
I just had a quick one. I want to make the point, because I've heard this before, that you might talk about accessory dwelling units in 1905. 1905 was a little different than now in terms of the exterior lighting, noise, sound systems. So some of these things that were maybe way in someone's backyard, proximate to someone else's yard, in 1905 was potentially different than 2024. The impact.
Could have been, but back in 1905, everybody would have had to have a horse too, which was a little bit different than what we have today. So I mean, yeah, things have changed relative, but I think the point, Dr. Paul, is that we tend to think of things in today's world like, oh geez, accessory dwelling units, what a new concept. Actually, they've been here historically. I mean, in today's world, we read articles about multi-generational housing where grandma, you know, the son, the daughter, and then the kids all live in a house. My God, multi-generational housing was how immigrants from Europe came here in the United States, where they all lived on in the same property. So I mean, some of these concepts that we think of today are ones that we've been, actually the United States has seen and have taken for granted. In today's world, they seem to have a spotlight on them for some reason. But I get your concerns. I mean, there are different issues today than there were back in 1905.
John, real quick.
Yeah,
I just, in your question about desire for this process to help the planning commission understand the council members' opinions and thoughts. Because like Mr. Newman said, that there's a lot of these changes are kind of interconnected. If you do one, if you don't do another, then, you know, what does that accomplish? So, I'm not sure about speaking to each one individually. I want to just say up front, I generally support the toolkit recommendations, and Council Member Walker and I have been working on a list of recommendations we want in this process, and working with resident Matthew Fedek on that. So, however this process comes to kind of share what we want, what we support, as just to inform the planning commission where we stand, however that's productive. I would say out the front, the toolkit we're generally supportive of. So if that's helpful, and as we go on, I know if you're looking for thumbs up, thumbs down at this point, I think it's probably too early for that, but just want to stay at the beginning. It's collapsing zoning districts, as the toolkit suggests, there's a lot of reasons for doing that.
Yeah, I think that's a great, thanks, Councilman. I think the one thing that we talked about at the PC is, and I've talked to the manager and Lisa about, is we don't want to get to a point towards the end when we start coming out with the kind of like the final draft, not the final, but like the initial draft, where stuff in that draft is a surprise to people, and then there's a lot of pushback either from council or the plant or the public. We want to make it more of a transparent process, so any of the concerns or ideas that people have, we'd like those thrown into the bucket early enough that we can kind of thrash them out. So as we get towards the end, we have the ability to wordsmith those kind of policies into that regulatory language that we need to adopt the code. So, but even though you may not have specific recommendations now, and people are taking a look in more detail, as those ideas come out, please feel free to share them. with me and then, or with Lisa or the manager, and then we'll make sure that they rise to the planning commission and we have those conversations.
I just want to say, I'm not joining in any group, councils or planners. I would rather take this as an individual basis because I think it behooves us to look at every step of the way rather than taking, we've decided this is what we need. I'd rather we go step by step. We have a 2-year process on this, and I think it's great. I was worried that it was a 1-year process, had to be done by the end of this year. But now that we have the time, I'm hoping that we delve into not just a sheet that somebody gives you, but I hope that you go with the step by step as I think you are going to do.
Yeah, yes, I mean, there's different milestones throughout the process. I guess the point I was making, Mayor, is I don't want to wait. You don't want to wait until the end when a lot of the work has been done, then have people have significant issues. I'd rather, as we go through it, as we have ideas and issues come up, or people have some concerns about certain provisions, that we have the opportunity to tweak those and resolve those before we keep moving down the road.
You'll be bringing us back together, will it be?
Yes.
What is your plan on the
Well, I think
process for that?
the process that I've talked to, Cynthia's not here, but the process that I mentioned to Cynthia as the chair of the PC is that we want to have several community open houses on the major parts of the plan as we get them done. All right. People aren't too concerned about the article that sets up the zoning board of appeals. People aren't too concerned about what the site plan chapter says in terms of how people have to put together and what the findings of the site plan are. The areas where people get concerned are the zoning districts and what those requirements are and what the uses are. So at major parts of the process, we would have community open house to allow the community to come in, take a look at what's been done and give everybody comment. I've recommended to the PC chair, in order to make this more of a transparent process, that every couple of months that there would be a very small PowerPoint presentation where she would go to council and it would be on the council agenda, which is also public and on Zoom, to give the city council an idea of exactly where the planning commission is at relative to the ordinance. So along the way, we can keep getting feedback.
The entire thing at the end wouldn't be voted on until it's complete. The whole plan is done. We're not going to be voting on section. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
John? Going back to what appears to be priority number 1, which is zone review and potential simplification and or collapse. Could you address overlays? You addressed averaging as one way to deal with setbacks, but could you address overlays as a way to somehow help with the simplification process?
Well, yeah, overlays are a zoning tool that it's not, you're not rezoning a piece of property. The overlays on top of the base zoning district and has its own set of special requirements. Now, I know here in Petoskey, your plan unit development is actually a zoning district. In some communities, the plan unit development is an overlay. So it just, you can use it anywhere in the community and it overlays on top of the base district, okay? As I had talked about at the Planning Commission, even though that the State Historic Preservation Office has a target on my face, we've created a historic overlay, which is overlaid in areas of neighborhoods that are already included in the National Register of Historic Places, in order to make sure that any type of reconstruction or addition to buildings is done in such a way that it's within the context and character of the neighborhood. So overlays can be a tool. Overlays are used a lot in business corridors. Like, for example, you've got 8 different business districts. In some communities, they use an overlay along highway corridors that create additional standards for lighting, signage, building placement, parking, access management, okay? So each business district doesn't have to address that, but the overlay would address all of those districts to make sure that there's uniform consistency. So it's a planning and zoning tool that can be used. And it can be evaluated as we move through the process, but that's a great question.
John, I just had
Yeah.
a quick, you've alluded to public comment, you talked about open houses. One statement, I don't know if it was said correctly or just trying to understand. Community house, open houses to ask the public what they think of what's been done. Is it what's been done or what we want to do? I mean, where is the engagement? Is it some input before we have ideas, council has ideas. You've talked about 3 legs to this thing in the public. So where does that happen?
The open house usually presents materials that have been like the first flush through the mayor, council, and the planning commission. Okay, so I mean, it's things that have been talked about conceptually, put on paper, and at that point in time, we want to get some public comment on it before we go through the next step of actually finishing those concepts up. So it's got to be worked on most of the ordinance is going to be worked on at the planning commission level. As I mentioned, periodically we'll be bringing parts back, and the PC chair will be making presentations to the council to get their feedback. When we get to some areas in the ordinance that are areas that are impactful for the community, that's when we have an open house to get that reading from the community in terms of what their temperature is relative to those issues. I think we've talked about having 2 to 3 open houses as part of the process. In the city of Mount Pleasant, they adopted a new code a couple of years ago, which is based on character districts. All right, this is a lot different. They have different districts that are, like, for example, suburban large lot, suburban, general urban center. And then within those districts, they classify or they describe what the character is. The character of those districts then basically migrates into the zoning code in terms of the building height, the bulk requirements, the setbacks, and the uses in order to achieve the character of those districts that are based heavily on their master plan. So their master plan had a lot of these different concepts in it. They carried the concepts into the zoning code, and then from the zoning code, they basically wrote the code to mirror the districts that were articulated in their master plan. So they came up with the idea of character districts rather than they're technically a zoning district, but they're a little bit softer way graphically of presenting what the character is of the various neighborhood. And when we talk about neighborhoods, we always think of neighborhoods in terms of residential. We do have commercial neighborhoods as well. So that's
So a little bit of a form-based approach, maybe?
it's a little, yeah, actually, it's a little bit of a form-based without getting into the detailed architecture, what the buildings need to look like. And it's more placement, it's more form, it's more height. It's more street character in terms of how the streetscape impacts the neighborhood. In some areas, like I said, Petoskey doesn't have a lot of green space left. The community is primarily built out, so the character is already there. In some communities where they still have areas to develop, they're trying to establish character that's going to look the same as kind of like the historical development patterns of the community. They don't want something that looks totally out of place. This is an example. This is the code that was developed in Acme Township, which is just in Grand Traverse County on US 31. For example, they have a district called the Mixed Housing Neighborhood. They have the intent, they have the distinguishing characteristics, And then they have what is the land use table, which shows what uses are permitted in the district. And then they also have some of the bulk requirements in terms of the frontage type, the typical building heights, and the public open space. And they have a mixed use neighborhood. They have a single family neighborhood. They have one called Corridor Flex, which is their commercial corridors along 31 and 72, which provide a variety of more mixed uses in terms of development potential. So this is another example of a character district that are set up. What a lot of communities are taking a look at is trying to figure out how they can encourage missing middle housing. All right. Simply put, in the United States and primarily in Michigan, we have really two forms of housing. And if you think about it, it pretty much makes sense. We have a lot of single family houses as a percentage of our dwelling units. And then we have mid-rise apartments, and we have very few in between. And the in-between stuff is like duplexes, triplexes, cottage courts, townhomes, live-work units, and that's what they refer to as the missing middle. And the other part of it is this is where you have like the whole issue or concept of accessory dwelling units. So some communities, when they're redrafting their zoning codes, are taking a look at ideas like duplexes. Do we allow triplexes? Are we going to allow things like cottage courts in the community, and are they going to be permitted by right, or are they going to be special approval uses? And what are their unit sizes? So these are some things that we can talk about as we move through the zoning code. Petoskey historically has duplexes sprinkled around the neighborhoods already. We have different types of housing styles. We have some townhomes already. Downtown, there's upper story apartments above some of the commercial units. So there's some of the missing middle is already happening in the city, but it's one of the things that we want to look at, should look at as part of the overall zoning code. Missing middle is you can allow it to integrate within the context of a neighborhood. And that's what these slides show. For example, the houses that are in color in the lighter orange and yellow is the concept of being able to distribute those throughout a block. So you may have a single family home next door, you may have a duplex. In some other communities, they allow those to actually appear different types along the commercial corridor as a transition. So you could have a commercial corridor where you allow maybe mixed use development or even maybe some apartment units as a mix within the commercial corridor. I think one of the things that has happened over time since 1929 is that we've segregated all of our land uses to where they're no longer integrated. So it's awful hard if you want a quart of milk to walk 2 blocks to go to a corner store to buy your milk. You actually have to get in the car and then drive out on 131 to go to Meijer or out to DW, wherever you want to go. And that's because we've done such a great job of segregating all of our land uses. It really has kind of minimized the interaction at the neighborhood and the local level. Now, I'm not advocating that we allow commercial uses in residential neighborhoods, but this concept is starting to get to the point where it's kind of okay maybe to have different type of housing within a neighborhood. It's okay to have a duplex next to a single family, that kind of idea and concept. This is an example of, this was in the East Jordan master plan that was done a couple of years back. This is the site of the former EJ factory on Lake Charlevoix. As part of the master plan process, the community was asked to come in and basically visualize how they would like that part of the community redeveloped. And it was very interesting that when it was all said and done, people looked at it as a really mixed use neighborhood with apartments, townhomes, with single family duplexes, extremely walkable, somewhat dense, between 6 to 10 units per acre. So that was their community vision, with the idea of having the waterfront open as a public asset and then allowing the development to occur back from that. Eventually, this will get articulated into their zoning code, which they're in the process of taking a look at.
So John, that's the whole site right there, that whole picture.
This is around 40 acres of their property. They own, the family there owns probably 1.5 miles of the shoreline. The factory site is probably around 40 to 50 acres in size. And this is going to be more of a complex project because it's a brownfield. So when this gets developed, different parts of it get developed, it's going to be a project that's going to involve the Brownfield Authority and, you know, different funding mechanisms in order to actually make this for its implementation. The housing network out of Grand Rapids, this is done by Ryan Kilpatrick. He wanted to emphasize this gets at the cost of housing. And when people start talking about affordability is really governed by the cost of the land and the cost of construction. And what this graphic shows that you can take the same 100-foot lot, and if depending on how it's divided, it can significantly reduce the cost of land per unit. So if you have one single lot, and the properties could be worth $75,000, just the lot before the house is built. If that 100-foot was divided down into 33-foot lots, that same property would be worth 75, but divided by 3, it's 25,000. So the point here is that we talk about affordable housing. Affordability is really governed by the cost of the land and the cost of development and the cost of construction. So there's various components that go into developing a piece of property. One of the things that is kind of one of the underlying principles of RRC is that about 20% of the development cost of a house or an apartment complex is based on the development review guidelines and regulations. So we don't think about it that way, but if we can reduce the barriers relative to how fast we can review a project and what's required of the developer, that can have a significant cost in lowering the cost of the project and possibly making it more affordable for different income groups to actually live on in those properties. And the other part that I want to talk about is rethinking the terrible word of density. People are legitimately scared of density. They have kind of wild ideas about what density is. And over the years, we have reduced the density in our communities. As this graphic shows, back in pre-1950, right after World War II, the density in many communities was around 29 dwelling units per acre, because we didn't really segregate land uses. We had housing mixed in with commercial. We had apartments next to residential. Between 1950 and 1980, along with the strong encouragement of the Federal Housing Administration, because FHA basically put in place a lot of guidelines and standards that lenders had to follow. And FHA really encouraged the large lot residential. And because of that, in order, if you wanted to get financed as a residential developer, you pretty much had to follow their guidelines, and their guidelines basically resulted in the suburbanization of our communities, where you have the curvilinear streets, you have the large lots, you have, dwellings, the dwelling unit acreage is, you may have anywhere from 3 to 4 units an acre versus the higher densities that we used to get. And that whole issue has been actually starting to get a little bit more improved, but in many communities, like for example, down in the Detroit metropolitan area, some of the third ring suburbs like Canton, Farmington Hills, for example. Those communities down there are all suburbanized. I mean, they all have a lot of curvilinear lots. They all have large lots. They all have single family. The housing units are between 2,500 and 3,500 square feet. And there's not a lot of mix of any type of housing units that are available. And that's part of the whole idea of rethinking density.
And I just have a question on that.
Yeah,
You know, and we're back to the fact, I live in a dense neighborhood and love it, but we're fairly built out in Petoskey, as you mentioned. So again, as we talk about these concepts, what are we talking about? Are we talking about areas that there aren't houses? Are we talking about?
Infill development.
Right.
infill
development.
yes, yeah. Infill development's a great example. I mean, there's two type of densities that over the years that I have. Density is a visualization of how a property is built out, and that's what people get concerned about. Now, this is what I refer to as invisible density, okay? This is density that you take for granted. This is a single family home with a accessory dwelling unit that's above the garage. The lot is 7,000 square feet. All right? If you take a look just at that lot and the number of units, the density is 12.4 units per acre. All right? People wouldn't even think that that's a high density piece of property because they would walk by and say, oh, geez, it's a single family home with a garage. Okay, that's invisible density. Now, visible density is one that Brian and I know about. This is right down the street. Now, this is the Water Street condos. There's 16 units on a half an acre, and this is a 32 units per acre. So this is what Councilperson Walker was talking about. This is an infill development, and this is 32 units an acre, and technically this is a denser development. But when you look at it, Brian and I live there. I don't think at all it's a dense development at all. But when on paper, if we were to tell the neighborhood there's an infill development and it's 32 units an acre, I can guarantee you there'd be a lot of people at the planning commission meeting saying that's too much for the neighborhood, because density is really interpreted visually. All right, so there's invisible and there's visible density. And the only reason why I'm putting these slides in is just to start getting people comfortable with the idea that you can have different densities that look appropriate within the context of a neighborhood, especially for infill projects.
Next
John.
question, John, that
Yeah.
previous slide that you just showed.
Sure.
What would be considered, is that a zero lot line?
No, it's got setbacks. You can see the setbacks on the side. It's probably got a 5 or 6 foot side yard setback.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I saw the sidewalks on this side, on the street.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think this is something that you would find in a traditional neighborhood. And, you know, people walk by it and don't think anything of it, but when you take a look at the numbers, it's 12 units an acre.
John, in one of the articles that we shared in the Petoskey zoning was talking about the word compactness
Uh-huh.
as a different word for density. I really liked that because we think of, we can agree we don't like sprawl, and compactness is a word kind of is the opposite of that. So I really liked the use of the word compactness
Yes.
as a
Yeah.
goal that we're aiming.
Well, and typically I also like the term, but we kind of overuse it, but I like the term walkability. When you have a walkable neighborhood, that means you have a neighborhood that where you can walk from your house into the downtown. I haven't done the quantitative measurement, but I think Petoskey definitely fits in what they call the 15-minute community. That basically with a 15-minute walk, you have a variety of land uses that you can come across. Downtown, commercial, institutional, library, churches, that type of thing. So I think the community is pretty much there, but I think we have to start and we can talk about it later in terms of how we misuse it. Certain terms trigger certain reactions. Yeah. This is another way of looking at rethinking density. We always refer to it as the number of units per acre. It could be used as the modest increase in density with smaller dwelling sizes. So, for example, you could have a duplex on the same square footage as a single family lot. As long as the dwelling unit requirement, the minimum dwelling unit size is analyzed and it's not overly excessive. Okay? Emmett County zoning ordinance, their minimum dwelling unit size is 560 square feet. All right, I know that's an issue that's being discussed openly in Harbor Springs now that they're going through their public hearing process. Because Harbor Springs Planning Commission wanted to align with Emmett County zoning code, and people in the community have some issues with maybe going that low. But the idea is in some communities, the minimum floor plan, minimum square footage that they have in their code could be 1,200 to 1,400 square feet. Well, in today's construction environment, take 1,400 square feet, multiply it by $250 or $300 a square foot for construction cost. You're definitely over 400,000 square feet, $400,000 per unit. And that is not something that's going to be readily affordable by people that make $60,000 to $80,000 a year. Okay. So one of the ideas is taking a look at your minimum unit size to allow maybe for more compactness within your neighborhood. So that's something that can be discussed. One thing that we forget about, which has come up over and over when we talk about dwelling units, especially with duplexes, is that people forget that in 1790, okay, the average household size was 5.79 people per household. Now, I knew when I was growing up, when I was a kid, it was my mom and dad and my three brothers. So there was 6 of us in a household, which was pretty average in our neighborhood and our community. All right, back in, that was boomer, okay, mid boomer cohort back in the 60s and the 70s. And today in 2018-19, the average number of people per dwelling unit is down to about 2.6. All right, and in some communities that we've worked in, the number of people in a household is actually 1.9. Now in Canada, it's getting close to 1.1. And in China, it's around the same, 1.1, 1.2. The point is that people go, oh, there's no way we can afford, we want to have a duplex in our neighborhood because it's going to cause more increase of people in our neighborhood and using our streets. Well, technically, no. Why? Because the household size has decreased. Because back in 1960, that house over on Mitchell Street may have had 5 people living in it. Today, even with the duplex, it may only have 4. All right. So as our household size has decreased, there's an opportunity for things like duplexes without actually increasing the number of people in a neighborhood. I've had one community, somebody got up and said, well, you know, a duplex is going to mean more cars. Well, I'm sorry. I've seen houses where mom and dad have 2 teenagers and they have 4 cars. I've seen duplexes where they have 1 because maybe the duplex is close enough to downtown that the person living in the duplex doesn't want a car. They ride a bike or they walk to their job downtown. So we kind of have to think the mindset's got to change a little bit in terms of how we think about people, how they use property today. But this is a great graphic that shows that over years, our household sizes decrease.
Johnny, just on the extreme end of that, if we're in 1790, the number of people, the percent who live rural out in the country in farmhouses is hugely greater.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's not,
No.
we're more at the end of the curve.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
If I may.
sure.
I know some of the information that you've already provided on the website, in particular, there was one article on infill. And what was kind of attractive to that approach for me was the fact that the infill looks so much like the existing character that was in the neighborhoods. And I guess I'll share that just one of my concerns is I think we have a lot of great neighborhoods in our community. And when I start to think about greater density and infill,
when I see those examples in that article, I get kind of excited about the possibility. But at the same time, I think about, you know, if some greater density didn't fit into the neighborhood, and how would that detract from, you know, detract from the current character? Could you just speak to maybe just a little bit best practices, just kind of help my own openness towards this subject in terms of things that you've seen in other communities that kind of control or set boundaries in terms of what maintaining the character of a neighborhood?
Sure, that's a great question, Doug. That kind of gets back to some of the original slides in the code of actually articulating what the character is for the neighborhood versus just the zoning district. And I would, you know, with Carolyn and with Rick on the planning commission as architects, professional architects. For example, you could take a duplex, and the duplex doesn't have to look like a duplex, okay? For example, the requirements for if the planning commission or the city and the city council, because they're the ones that will adopt the code, want to allow duplexes in neighborhoods as a special use or as permitted by right, there could be standards in the code that say that a duplex has to have two things that happen. One, if they have a door that is on the front of the building, that the initial door into the duplex has to have a foyer inside the building where then it's separated. So the idea is that you don't have two front doors on the building on the outside, okay? I've seen other codes that have duplexes is that one door faces the street, the other door is on the side of the building. So you don't end up with that situation where you have a flat building along the street with two doors, okay? So there's ways of, if you want to encourage infill, but you want to do it appropriately, then we have to decide where it's going to be allowed in the community and what neighborhood and what the character of that infill should look like that gets filled in, okay? And we all can do that. I mean, that's within the purview of the zoning code is to articulate that. So yeah, that can happen. The one thing that, and I think this is something that we talked about at the last PC meeting as part of the planning commission work plan, is that the master plan action program in the back, which is 100, I love this number, 163 separate actions that we have in the master plan. A number of them revolve around the protection and preservation of historic neighborhoods. And I know that when the PC met to adopt its 2024 annual report, which will be going to the city council, there was interest in taking a look back at the number of neighborhoods that we have that could be qualified as National Register districts. Because right now your National Register districts are parts of Lake and Mitchell in the downtown. But I have to tell you, from a historical context, you have neighborhoods over on Jackson, Madison, Monroe, over on this side of town, on the other side of the Bear River, that are historic neighborhoods as well. Now, they may not be as grand of the 3,000 or 4,000 square foot homes that we may find on Mitchell. But some of the houses over there that are 950 or 1,200 square feet are historic in context, because some of them were built back in 1890 to 1925. And those neighborhoods have that we can create a character that if someone wants to build a new house in those neighborhoods, that it doesn't turn out to be a McMansion. All right, because that's what's happened in some of the communities downstate, is that people have come in. Birmingham is a great example. Used to have a lot of 1 and 1.5 story bungalows. People came in, bought the 1.5 story, tore it down, and built a 4,000 square foot. Yeah, to some degree, yes. Yeah. And they don't fit in. So can that be controlled to some degree? Yeah, we can have character zones within the ordinance. The nice thing that I think, based on the composition that I see on the planning commission, is that we have a diversity of people with different backgrounds. The nice thing is we have 2 people currently on the planning commission that are professional architects. And so there's no reason when we really dive into the weeds a little bit, we can't come up with something that really kind of gets to what you're saying, Doug, that you can have infill. We want to encourage infill. We just don't want it to have a negative impact on the neighborhood. All right. So. This is a concept which is referred to, this is out of California. This is a 8-unit detached single-family development, 5.8 dwelling units per acre. As Councilman Shields says, this is a compact development, okay? These are integrated in such a way that they are very walkable. They, instead of everybody having their own large front yard, they have a common space for people to gather and socialize. This is another great example that I like. These are called cottage courts, all right? You can see how you can take a nice piece of property, maybe a half an acre or less, and the way that you place the houses on 0 lot lines with a common lawn area, common open space, you can have a very attractive residential development. Now, when I showed this in a community that was having some issues with density and they asked me to come in and kind of try to lower the temperature, when I showed this slide, one of the people in the audience said, I'll buy the one that's the 3rd one down. All right. If we had a project like that in our community, I would be selling my big house and moving there. And these are 2 different examples of how these smaller houses, these are probably 1,100 square feet, maybe 950. The one in the back is obviously smaller, but these type of housing units are very attractive to people that want to age in place, or that are mature or empty nesters that don't want to maintain a 2,500 square foot home, that want to kind of downsize a little bit, but they want something that's smaller but still very nicely done. So this is an example of a nice type of infill that could happen in the community. One of the things that some of the communities are talking about, this is in Glen Arbor, which is over in Leelanau Peninsula County. They're looking at a dwelling unit size. This is small, 480 square feet. And they've articulated what the floor plan would be. The one thing that we found is that the Michigan Construction Code doesn't have a minimum size for a dwelling. They have the minimum size for the components that go into the dwelling. So on some cases now, I've asked the building official in different communities, based on the Michigan Building Construction Code that they follow, what would you think the minimum dwelling size could be? And in Emmett County, that's how they came up with 560. Downstate, I presented that to a building official. He mulled it around for a couple of days, got back with me, and his computation was 585 square feet. All right. And he said that's definitely within the building code. Now, am I recommending that small? No, it's all got to be a local preference. But the idea is that, you know, a smaller dwelling can actually accommodate, you know, different population groups within your community. This could be something that's very adaptable to somebody that's working in a local restaurant, for example, as an apartment unit. So, you know, some communities are just eliminating altogether the minimum dwelling size and basically falling back on the minimum dwelling size is based on what the minimum construction code will allow in the community. I'm not advocating it. I'm just pointing it out as one of the concepts.
Well, they just went through that like the last 2 or 3 years, right? So I think it was decided upon by both bodies that what was passed was 600 square feet.
Yep.
And we have examples of homes that have been built since, one home that's been built since then as an infill development at that 600 square feet.
One of the things that we'll take a look at is, you currently have it right now in the code. It is the I used the wrong font and it didn't get transferred right. So we have wing things here. I know what the slide says. I wanted to compare in the middle column is the city of Petoskey minimum. City has minimum, maximum, they're the same. And this is what some of the code requirements are. So for a grocery store, it is 1 unit, 1 parking space per 400 gross square feet, city of Petoskey. Congress for New Urbanism, theirs is 3 per 1,000. So the city and the Congress for New Urbanism, which is kind of like some of the new standards, is very close. There are some areas where there are some differences. The one thing that we need to be cognizant of is when you have a minimum and maximum and it's the same, it doesn't provide any flexibility for the business owner that needs to have parking. It doesn't provide them enough flexibility unless they have to go before the zoning board of appeals to get a variance. So on the parking requirements, I'm not advocating that we have a minimum, because then you end up with large parking lots like you have out of Lowe's. I am advocating a maximum, but one of the things that we need to talk about is there's some magic percentage in there where we can give somebody some latitude one way or the other, depending on their business model, okay? One thing that's just one of those things, a site standard that is part of the code that we need to just be cognizant of. The other part is that a lot of.
Can I ask you a quick one there?
Sure.
I guess the thing that's come up a few times in terms of minimums is when there's commercial uses that are directly adjacent to residential. If there's no minimum and there's some perception there's not enough parking, the residents are extremely unhappy that you might allow some type of commercial right next to them that had no minimum.
Yeah, I could see a concern like that. I think that
Versus a corridor.
Yeah.
where-
the conversation I think we have to have, Dr. Paul, about parking is parking doesn't provide jobs, parking doesn't provide taxable value. A parking space with maneuvering lane is 350 square feet. If you were to take, you see what I'm getting at is a lot of communities that have dedicated a lot of land to parking have really missed a significant economic development opportunity, and the communities have missed out on taxable valuation.
Sure.
Back historically, back in 1910, 1920, before Ford started really chunking out a lot of cars, people parked on the street and there wasn't really anything called a parking lot, and we had a lot of really cool uses in our towns. But now if you take a look at an aerial photograph, just a lot of land that's been consumed by asphalt. Okay, now I'm not advocating that a business owner doesn't need to provide parking. They should be able to, there should be parking allowed, or they have to provide parking. But I'm getting to the point as a kind of a person that more is really takes a look at the context of a community. I hate to say this in a way, but as a business owner, it would really, to me, it would be interesting that if you didn't have any parking requirements, what would happen? Because as a business owner, they may want to have on-street or off-street parking, but they may not either. But I don't think we want to get that radical. But I think if you take a look at what parking has done, great examples, go down Anderson Road and Bear Creek. I mean, there are parts of those parking lots that have never had a car parked on. And then I look at that and I see acres of asphalt that lead to heat island effect in the summer. And then from a property owner point of view, they spend way more money on snow removal than they should because those parking lots are never filled.
Right.
And that's what the minimum has led to. Now, I can tell you in some communities that just have a minimum, you would have, for example, Meijer department store would come in and you would look at their parking lots, and their parking lots were upwards of 8 to 12 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. And today that standard is 4. Okay, so they were building 2 to 3 times more parking than they really needed. But that's what the minimums allow. Now, the maximums have capped that. But what I'm getting at is if you have a minimum and maximum at the same, is you're really not allowing the planning commission nor the property owner any flexibility to make any design changes based on the configuration of their lot. That's what I'm getting at, so. The other part is big opportunity for shared parking in the ordinance. That if you have property that has a residential unit on it and an office, that we have a computation in the ordinance that allows them to basically reduce the amount of parking based on the number of the different type of lane uses that may be on the same parcel. So this is a shared parking provision that we should take a look at. Petoskey is a resort community. It's a walkable community. It's compact. This is in the Emmett County zoning ordinance. They actually allow a reduction in parking based on the number of bicycle parking spaces they have for their businesses. So depending on the group of business, they allow a reduction in parking spaces. This has been carried over. This is in the proposed Harbor Springs zoning code as well, because during the summertime, there are a lot of people walk and ride bikes. And the idea is, hey, if people are riding a bike, we don't need to have more parking spaces. We can actually have more building area.
John, relative to parking, one thing that I've thought about is, yeah, people may complain that there are not enough places to park bikes, but the route to those bike parking places is also important. You know, if people don't feel comfortable getting on a bike and riding to where they're gonna do something and park their bike, to me, the routes to those bike parking spaces are just as important as the bike parking spaces themselves.
Yes.
So in our discussion about bike parking, I think we also want to think about bike routes.
Good point. The next concept that's being looked at in communities is the issue of density and height bonuses in order to encourage affordable housing. All right. The way that they're doing that is by allowing a height bonus in some communities if they allocate a certain percentage of the units for affordable housing. This can be done vertically and it can be done horizontally. So in a downtown area or an area that allows for height, we may want to look at incentivizing the affordable housing by allowing the developer to put in some additional units into the building with the dedication of so many units within the building being set aside for affordable housing based on the area median income. It can also be done horizontally where you allow greater density on a piece of property if there's a certain number of houses that are set aside for affordable and workforce housing. So you're incentivizing it by allowing a greater number of units on the same lot in order to spread that cost out, in order to provide some that are available. I want to take a break here because I want to throw a concept out or a term out that I think we need to start using. As a developer, okay, and I think I want to do it now because I think at least at the council level, the council has heard this term. If I'm a developer and I want to provide workforce housing, I use the term capital stacking, okay, which is kind of a cool term. I'm a developer and I'm going to develop this property by doing a capital stacking deal where I get different types of funding that comes in order to provide some affordable housing for some folks in town that are between 80 to 120% of the area median income. On the citizen side, we refer to that as subsidized housing, which has a negative connotation. What I want to start at least advocating here is that we look at housing as fair share housing. If I'm somebody that makes, I'm a school teacher and my salary is $60,000 a year. And based on some typical underwriting criteria of 25% of my or 30% of my monthly income, gross monthly income is used for housing. That means I can afford a house or an apartment of $1,250 a month. That's my fair share of the housing. It's not subsidized. That's my fair share. That's what I pay, just like anybody else would pay based on 25 or 30% of my housing. So, and the reason why I bring this up in the community, when people have mentioned to me about the Maple Block, they've said it like, well, geez, you know, that's subsidized housing. No, it's not subsidized. It's fair share housing. The people that live there between 80 and 120%, the firefighter, the teacher, the chef in the local restaurant, they're paying their fair share of their income towards that rent. And the rest of it is based on basically on incentivized financing. So I like the term, I live in an incentivized housing unit, not a subsidized. So I'm only throwing it out because the terms can make a definite impact on people's perception.
Sure.
And, you know, I think when the Maple Block gets built, it's going to be a great example of using a plan unit development and a brownfield in order to take a derelict piece of property or functionally obsolete piece of property and turning it into a very productive use. And that kind of gets at what the density and the bonuses are. People look at that and go, well, that's subsidized housing. No, it's not subsidized. This is fair share housing. Okay. Now, the other part that I want to get to, and it's not in the slideshow, but I want you to be cognizant of what's going on here. I'm sure you're all aware in the morning, if you're out between 7 and 8:30 or 9 o'clock, you see the number of cars that are coming into the city to work. Petoskey's an employment center for this part of the region. The same thing in Traverse City. Now, what we fail to realize is that people that live like in Wolverine or in Alanson or down by Boyne Valley, down in that area, that work here in Petoskey, are paying for their rent and their housing 25% of their income. But they're also paying a percentage higher for transportation costs and fuel. So people that live here, and you know, we drove this example home in Traverse City. People that live in Washington Street, which is their Mitchell Street, that are right next to the downtown, their cost of housing and transportation is 18%. The people that have to drive in from Kalkaska to work in the restaurants and provide the hotel help, they're paying upwards of 46 to 53% of their income on housing and transportation. All right. And so that's the issue that we have going on that this can help resolve. But we just have to we have to start thinking about all of this a little bit differently as a community. All right. The other area that we can help significantly on development is the elimination or the amount of reduced approvals and steps that we require a developer and a property owner to go through. All right. That can be done through site plans that are subject to administrative review unless they trigger a certain number or trip generation, which would require planning commission review. We also should be somewhat have a sensitive eye to what we're going to require people to go through special use permits, because those require a separate public hearing and usually a delay of 30 to 45 days, depending on when they submit their application. Now, some projects require special use because of their potential impacts, but I think many ordinances are a little bit too lax, and they just they're a little bit too free with requiring too many uses to go through special use. So I think when we go through this on a district by district basis, we should be a little bit open. We should have our eyes open relative to the uses that we want to run through the special use permit process and the ones that we don't. The rewriting of the 2006 Public Act 110, 2006, which is the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, came up with several different classifications now of non-conforming property. All right. And those changes make a lot of sense. They allow a non-conforming use in a district to be able now, under certain conditions, to actually expand, restore and maintain themselves versus some ordinances which said if you're a non-conforming use, you cannot reconstruct it, you cannot go through reconstruction, you can't restore the building, you basically have to allow it to go into it's basically planned depreciation to the point where the building becomes so derelict, you have to tear it down. All right. So the revision to the Enabling Act now allows communities to have different classifications of non-conforming use. Perfect example. This is the Jefferson Street Market. This is a block away from our corporate headquarters in Ann Arbor. This building was vacant for years, for decades, just sitting there. And the city revised its non-conforming code standards, and a property owner bought it with the idea of renovating it and restoring it to a neighborhood coffee shop and bakery and small store. And now this provides great opportunities within the neighborhood for people to walk and have coffee in the morning. It's across the street from an elementary school. You don't see it here, but in the building, as soon as you walk into the door on the left-hand side, they have a cooler that's filled with ice cream bars, because the kids, when they get out of school, they run across the street and they get an ice cream, before they get on the bus. It has very little impact on the neighborhood. In fact, a lot of the neighbors during the summer come and have coffee outside on the sidewalk. But this is a great example of the non-conforming provisions being changed in the state statute to allow for the reactivation of these type of uses in the community. And you have some of these, but they're actually not, they're to some degree, they're zone business. But a great example is like what you have over on Emmett Street, where you have on the corner there, you have 2 or 3 businesses on the corner. In some communities, those would have all been zone non-conforming. But here they're not. But this is just an example of what changes have been made in the state statute and what the positive impact can be. As I talked about at the beginning, based on Rick's comment about how do you manage dimensions, this is what's going on relative to front yard setbacks now, where you can have an average of the front yard setbacks to provide a little bit of a differentiation within the neighborhood without really having any extremes. So if somebody wants to build a new building in an existing neighborhood, we would compute what the average front yard setbacks are, and then they would have that ability to build within that average area. Okay. One of the things that we can take a look at here in Petoskey is how the front porches are used on residential buildings in terms of unenclosed front porches, the old historic front porches. In some communities, they allow a unenclosed front porch to actually extend into the front yard setback in order to provide greater community continuity and space. It's kind of cool when people are sitting out on their front porches in the summertime and they can talk to their neighbors that are walking down the street as they're walking their dog. Some communities, they want to encourage that by allowing the unenclosed front porch to extend into the front yard, but that's something as a community we can talk about. This is the Sanborn map for the Madison Street neighborhood. And this goes back to 1905, I believe, October 1900? 1919. And this is where we were able to identify the second dwelling units along the alley. But this is also an example of the historical development pattern that we can use to build character for each of these neighborhoods, just based on how they were originally built. These drawings are really pretty accurate. If you were to zoom in, they actually have the dimensions of the front porch, the buildings, any of the outbuildings, the garage, relative to the lot lines. So these are very useful tools when we can find them to help it establish what the character is. Now, you can see on Madison Street, on the north side, by Ingalls, you can see where the corner buildings are a little bit closer to the front yards, to the right of way than the buildings in the middle, at least on the north side of the street. The south side of the street, they're pretty consistent along that line. Sometimes that was done because the person that built the houses actually built 2 or 3 in a row. That's why sometimes you have the house that's next door that looks the same way. So a lot of the continuity, they actually built them on the same setbacks. But this is front yard setbacks that are based on the historical context of the neighborhood. And this is what you can use in order to manage infill.
This map is pretty interesting because it shows the commercial buildings that are there on Liberty Street.
Yeah.
Down there on the corner of, that's Jackson Street at the bottom. That isn't identified, but historically, I found out that, when you wanted to go to Charlevoix, those commercial buildings are mixed into the west side neighborhood because you crossed the Mitchell Street Bridge and you went to Liberty Street. Mitchell Street ended at Liberty Street. Mitchell Street did not get extended west until the hospital was built in the 1930s. And so if you were going to Charlevoix, you went across the bridge, you turned left on Liberty, and went down to Jackson. And you continued on out and ended up over here going out by, Walgreens and McDonald's. Charlevoix. That was the route to Charlevoix. It's kind of interesting. So that kind of explains why there are these Idaho commercial buildings that are
On Liberty.
based in that west side of the residential neighborhood.
Thanks, Rick. I mean, that does make sense now. Where you have traffic, you have commercial buildings historically.
Right.
And that also highlights what you mentioned, John, earlier when we started the meeting, like. Look at it from a historical perspective to understand like where we're coming from and then our objectives for the future and understanding that historical context is really important.
Yeah.
The place where you and Brian live was a former like brownfield or
Petoskey manufacturing.
yeah, Petoskey manufacturing. So the context of that and that development was in the frame of like, we were turning it from old industrial to being a place where people could
Yeah.
live.
When we talk about this as a concept, in some communities now, they're just eliminating minimum lot size. I'm not advocating one way or the other, but part of it is they're relying on the market in terms of what the market's going to support for building size. The building code includes minimum sizes for bedrooms, kitchens, bathrooms, other spaces. So the building code drives what the minimum house size is going to be, which can affect the minimum lot size. The fire code, for example, specifies if you don't have 2-hour fire protection, it specifies what the distance between buildings needs to be, even residential buildings. You have height and setbacks, and then you have lot coverage. Typically, if you look at the ordinance, most ordinances, the lot coverage is 30 to 35%. Where they came up with that number, I have no idea. I really don't have any idea where that number came from. But in today's world, why can't we look at having minimum lot sizes that are 40, 50%? I mean,
Mhm.
And again, what's the historic pattern too? It'd be,
you look back, Dr. Paul, I don't know where that number came from, other than the fact that, a lot of those numbers were established back in 1929 by the United States Department of Commerce under Herbert Hoover, before he was president, where they came up with a model zoning code within a year that was adopted by over 350 communities, and that was before the internet. So I think a lot of communities just took that code
Right.
and they adopted those standards, and that's really the basis, but there's nothing locally that I find like any community. I mean, the lot size here is probably the same as in Harbor Springs and the same in Bear Creek. It's always between 30 and 35%.
I think the same thing happened after World War II, when sort of, some model zoning ordinance was promulgated and then it was basically applied across the board.
Yeah, the Federal Housing Administration and right after World War II took a look at developments like Levittown in New Jersey. And they go, wow, we really like that. And in order for us to lend money, we kind of like that open concept. So the FHA, if you can go back online and look at the old FHA, 1940, 1930, 1945, really in 1950, take a look at the FHA design guidelines. And that's the modern subdivision today. That's where it came from. But you know, we can take a look at what, you know, lot sizes. I'm not saying we should eliminate them. I know down in Grand Rapids, they've eliminated them. I think Minneapolis has done away with minimum lot sizes. But like I said, minimum lot size are also going to be managed by different parameters. Building code, fire code, for example, have a big impact too on what those can be.
John, have you seen lot coverages that are in categories based off like the size, the size of the lot? So if there's a small lot, to allow more housing in that small lot, you reduce you increase the coverage allowance. So like if it's a 3,000 and less square foot lot, you allow 50% coverage, whereas the 7,500 square foot lot, you don't allow as much coverage. So those small lots can be maximized.
I haven't seen it specifically, but there is, if you want to Google it, there is a planning concept called floor area ratio, FAR. And that's kind of the same concept. Depending on the size of the lot, your floor area ratio of your building can either go up or out. All right, and it's based on square footage and percentage. A lot of, I only see FARs in very urban areas that have a lot of commercial and like tall office buildings that are like 15, 20, 30 stories tall. I don't see them a lot in small communities, but that's kind of the concept. They call it floor area ratio computation.
John, I have a question in terms of simplification. I'm trying to make things easy and people can understand what to do. So this thing seems to say, well, you just got to read the fire code and the building code and try and apply it, these multiple sections versus having the minimal lot size is some percent. So do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I'm not advocating. What I'm getting at here is I think we fail to understand that when we pick a minimum lot size, there are other codes that also dictate what that minimum lot size can or cannot be. Okay, and one example is the fire code. The other example is the building code. Okay, there are provisions that I just think we need to be aware of rather than pick an arbitrary number. There are some other codes that we just need to be aware of that may have some implications when we talk about that. Something that is being talked about in other communities, especially in downtowns, is the allowance of ground floor residential units along the back of the buildings or along as alley infill. All right. Some commercial buildings have enough space behind them before they get to the public alley that in some communities they're allowing them to build a residential addition onto the back for an apartment as a way of encouraging additional housing. So that's one of the trends out there. I know that we have a very compact downtown area that does have alleys. I just wanted to make the planning commission and the council wanted to give you an idea that this is one of the other concepts that's being talked about. Another one that has actually amplified since COVID has been home occupations. Home occupations have been in ordinances for a long time. However, home occupations have now expanded a little bit with people that are working from home and conducting business. We have people that are doing tutoring, education, music classes. We have architects, graphic designers, web designers. We have healthcare professionals that are on the administrative side. We have technical people, people that work for Google, for example, and some of the other high-tech companies. They all work at home, and some of them have home offices. We also have people that have things like, in some communities, they allow as a home occupation, a hair salon, a dog grooming, seamstress, for example, and maker spaces. We have people in some communities that are, have home occupation that work out of their garage that make customized furniture, for example. So I think we need to at least think about it and maybe talk about it in terms of how expansive we want to allow home occupations. There's the concept of home occupations. There's the idea of cottage industry that's occurring in Harbor Springs. They actually the planning commission came forth on their first edition of the zoning code with what they called accessory commercial units. That's since, because of, you know, the public input, they've backed off on that on a little bit on the ACUs there, but Michigan State Extension has a really nice document on different categories of home occupations, depending on the type of uses. So it's something to think about. Like I said, since COVID, there's a lot more people that work at home. Some people don't want to necessarily give up a bedroom for an office. Some of the new accessory dwelling units, or accessory structures, I should say, not dwelling units. Accessory structures that you can find online now that you can buy as kits actually are small office modules that you can put in your backyard, where you can have your small office in. Okay, so it's something to think about. Something it's currently happening. Like I said, since COVID, it's kind of come up to the front burner a little bit more. The other part is aligning the regulated uses in the zoning code with uses that are currently in the building code. In some communities, there's a gap between what the building code allows and what the zoning code allows. So it doesn't hurt when we're evaluating uses in the various districts that we also have an understanding of what is and is not allowed by the building code. And I know that the current Petoskey ordinance has specific standards for downtown buildings, which have been working. This is a trend. Some communities don't have it. You have it. It's just something that we can take a look at. I don't know if it even needs to be retweaked or not. I would have to ask Rick, Carolyn, maybe that have done some downtown buildings. Rick, I think you're on the design committee. I'll just ask you, is the current downtown standards, are they working downtown?
They're being used for the facade grant program that the downtown management board runs. Where there's, I think it's $20,000 a year that are given in grants. And so the recipients of those grants do follow the downtown.
Yeah, I thought they were pretty good. But
that, they're voluntary.
they're voluntary though.
Well, they're voluntary. That's the one place where they are used specifically to try to make sure that the public money is spent in a way that reinforces the appropriate character of
The ones I saw in the code were like building height, when you build next to a 1-story, how far you can go up. Things like that in terms of build to line, or though I'm assuming those are operating okay.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, you already have them, but this is one of the trends. But like I said, the city's already got some building downtown standards in the code right now that, at least from my perspective, I thought were pretty good. And Rick is telling me now that, you know, they're working, so that's a good thing. So that's a summary of what's going on in the world relative to zoning today, these 18 different topics. Like I said, I'm not advocating for any one of them. I just want to make the council and the planning commission and the community aware of what some of the discussion issues are in other communities relative to when they're going through and recodifying their codes right now. So I do have a few other slides on a couple other planning topics. Since I got the entire group here, I talked to the manager and said, you know, I want to toss a few other things in for just to give you an idea of what's going on. But relative to the zoning, any other comments, or are we good right now? Okay. This is the process that we would use for the zoning informational website, which is up and running. Charlie sent me a pretty interesting article the other day, which had some other links in it, which I found, and we've posted that up on the site. If anybody comes across anything that you think is pretty good, send it over to me or Lisa, and we'll get it posted on the project web. The idea is that as the draft articles are reviewed by the PC, we would post those on the web in order to get public comment. The website will have a comment section and email, so people can freely send in some of their comments regarding what some of those provisions are. We plan on having quarterly updates by the Planning Commission to City Council. We have certain milestones where we're gonna have public open houses. The location of the open houses will be something that we can talk about. Either we have them here, we have them at a local elementary school, we have them in the church hall. I don't really care where we have them, but we need to have them and we need to make them. What we've done in the past is the open houses are usually open like from 3 in the afternoon until 7 at night. So we get people that are available in the afternoon coming. They stop before they go home after work, or they come in after they went home and had dinner. But it's mainly an informal open house where they can talk directly to members of the Planning Commission and the consultant on the project. We will periodically have informational boards in City Hall, and I want to put one at the library that update on the project and different concepts in order just to get people thinking about some of the more important issues. And then we'll have public information meetings when we have more of a complete draft put together before it starts running through the adoption cycle. So the intent here is to make this as transparent and open as possible. All right. I don't want anybody at the end getting up in front of council saying they didn't know what was going on. Okay, I want to give everybody an opportunity to get involved, including some of our partners in the process. So, and this is the website that's up and running, Petoskey Zoning. We've got a number of documents that are already posted. I know some of you have already been there. We have the comment info, and this is linked through the city website. So people that are interested in the zoning can go to the city web. Lisa's got it set up where they click the link, takes you to the project website. The reason why we do it this way, I don't want the city administration constantly updating stuff. We can just do it right in the office as we get the articles. So I've got a couple other topics that I want to discuss with you. And may I just excuse myself for a minute to get me a cup of coffee because I'm starting to get hoarse.
Of course. Bio break.
Zoning website, do you have a list of all the needs assessment? I'd have to look at it. Okay, we'll just make sure that that's in sort of. Yeah. I mean, we have the data. But it's very. Yeah. The summary.
Hey, how you doing?
Thanks. I just wanted to check and see if you had the housing needs assessment redone at the county or.
I don't think
City
they
of
do.
Petoskey did one that was like specific, but I also think the county one would
If
be.
I don't, it's wrong.
Yeah.
I consulted it. I'll put it, we have.
So you had like the one from last year. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
The one from,
Bowen, yeah, yeah. So we can make sure that that's listed in the education. But it speaks a lot to what you're talking about. Commuter traffic and, you know, that.
do you have any other articles that you think are something that are zoning related, zoning, housing related, something over to me, I'll get it posted.
Yeah, sure.
I think the more we have out there, I know some
Yeah.
people have already been. So.
Yeah, I just think that's, you know, super germane to, you know, the best up-to-date information we have. So sometimes when we have articles from other communities, we'll go, yeah, that's fine for them, but not for us. But this is, you know, The data that we need.
Yeah, the Bowen one for
Yeah.
30 is pretty spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, we've used it as part of our housing quality.
Yeah.
Analysis.
Excellent, thanks.
I don't think that got distributed to the council.
Not yet.
Not yet, it hasn't.
I think it's in terms of overall view of the planning.
I think that may not.
Are you dealing with?
I think I'm.
Yeah, because I just thought it would be appropriate. What you talked about, housing preservation is there, but I think the major topics are appropriate.
Well, why don't you? I think I had a slide in here on the work program.
You want me to wait until then?
Do I have it in there? Yeah. At the very end, do I have the work program?
You want me to see this?
No, Charlie was just talking about. Charlie, it's.
It's the very end.
Charlie.
Oh.
No, it's the last slide.
Got it.
So.
We can kind of go slow.
Yeah, yeah.
But in any.
What's that? Yeah, we'll be done, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What time is it?
10:49.
I was gonna keep you till 1:30. No, I'm joking.
41 minutes.
It's been really great, but.
The sun is shining. Very nice out there.
Yeah, I got up this morning, I go, you would know that there's not a cloud in the sky.
I am.
I was thinking April 6th would be raining out.
Yeah.
Man, Steve, yeah,
The typical winter.
yeah.
The first week of April, you should see that snow zone that
Yeah.
comes in.
Well, I talked-
Earlier in the
I had a meeting 2 days ago with the planning director of Marquette,
Oh.
who was home. The reason why I was home, because they got 2 feet of snow within 1 day.
My daughter said, Idaho, boys, they had flooding. In Garden City. They got a big garbage can, it was underwater. And then they drive a little further south and it's a snowstorm.
You gotta hurt everybody back. They all took off. I mean, I.
Good time. It's like, there's some midnight.
When he said that. Why don't the buildings on?
Yep. Yeah. people
I would have said that, or, that's what they.
Yeah, when you go, because I'm trying to think of what it was. I don't think it was. It went way back. You can see the street.
Well, the other thing too,
They're different.
they have, I'm looking at you know, the other house on the corner. of it? It has all the house, it looks like Mitchell Street. Straight close. For no, US.
No.
It wasn't there, just all that.
Yep, well, all just came back. Yes, the highway here. Didn't come. This was. And I logging. Yeah. Logging down. Power. Yeah. But that was down here. On the
Sarah, when you call when you want to get back in session.
Ready?
Ready?
Let's go.
39 minutes.
There.
Okay. All right. We gotta, I just have a few other topics that I want to just brief the group on. Planning Commission seen some of it. The one thing that is next, it's a conversation that we've had at the PC. We did a very preliminary housing quality assessment. All right, and rather than do a parcel by parcel review, what we did is we utilized the American Census Survey, the ACS, at the block group level in order to take a look at some housing related criteria to determine potential areas that we may want to focus attention on relative to housing incentive programs. Unfortunately, because of the size of the city, we don't have block by block data like we would have in a larger community. So we had to stick at the block group level, and there's roughly about 6 block groups that make up the city of Petoskey. Apologize for the light green on the map, but this is a map of all of the non-PRE parcels in the city. And PRE stands for primary residential exemption. So these are the lots in town that pay an additional 18 mills in taxes because they are, 1, either seasonally owned, or 2, they may be rental properties. And there are, based on the data from the equalization department, 1,544 parcels that are non-PRE. And the reason why we do this map initially is to see if we have concentrations of PREs in neighborhoods that we can go back and verify as potential rental units. These are the 6 block groups, 7 block groups in the city. And they not only encompass the city limits, but in some cases will extend into Bear Creek. But this gives you the basic geometry or area of the block groups. And the Census Bureau is the one that determines the physical boundaries, not the community. So unfortunately, things like the Bear River is not a physical boundary. So I tried to put some of the major streets like Standish, Emmett, Mitchell, Jennings, US 31 are some of the locators of where so you get an idea of where the block groups are. So what we did is, in order to determine areas that we think may have properties that could use some form of housing quality, is that we looked at some attributes that are in the American Community Census. First one was areas built prior to 1939. Block groups that had a high percentage of rental households. Areas that had home values less than $99,000 last time the census was done. Block groups that had a percentage of high school diploma only over the age of 25, the percentage of lower income households, and the percentage of female headed households. Now, the reason why we use these is that there's enough literature out there and other studies that indicate neighborhoods that have high percentage of renters, neighborhoods that have a high percentage of female headed households, low income households may not have the disposable income necessary in order to maintain the property in a standard condition. So like I said, without going block by block, piece of property by piece of property, we took a look at these intersecting values. And what we did is, using software, we were able to map the 2 variables against each other in order to come up with areas that had a high incident for both the variables. So in this case, on the vertical side, we mapped the block groups by the percentage of houses built prior to 1939 or earlier. And so as you went up the scale, the colors went from a light purple to dark purple. And then on the horizontal scale, we mapped the percentage of rental households on the blue scale. So if we went from light blue to dark blue, the percentage increased. And where they had a transect where they were both high in that block group, that meant it had a high percentage of units built prior to 1939 with a high percentage of renter households. So we did that for those 2 variables. And then we mapped that variable to show what areas, what block groups had a high frequency of both variable factors. And these were the three areas in the community. Now, the one area to the north that has the star, that's the darker purple, that has the incentivized housing project up there, which is has a number of housing units. So the number of rental units up in that block group is going to be a little bit artificially higher than it is in the city proper, which has more of a smattering of single family style homes. We also mapped home value against educational attainment. And these were the three where they had the highest degree of intersection. And then we mapped low income tier female headed households against percentage of income. And these were the three areas that had the highest degree of intersection. So then when we took a look at from a strategic point of view, block group B, block group E and G had the highest percentage of homes built prior to 1939, plus a high percentage of renters. Home values less than $99,000 with a high percentage of diploma-only population were B, C, and E, and the low-income households with a high degree of female-headed households was E, F, and G. So from a strategy point of view, and as I mentioned, we have Bay Harbor, which is the outlier in block group A, and in block group E, we have the several apartment complexes that that influence the percentage of renters. But if we take a look at a strategy, we would want to monitor block group C, D, and E just for housing quality. They're okay, but they could have the ability to decline. So we want to keep an eye on them. Rental inspection program would be appropriate in block group A, B, F, and G, because that's the high percentage of rental properties. We would want to take a look at creating a neighborhood enterprise zone in block group B, block group F, which would be provide some incentive for housing rehabilitation. And then, which was not part of the housing quality, but part of basically a land use analysis. We think it's appropriate to do a more detailed sub-area plan for block group F because that area is slowly emerging from industrial and warehousing, could be into residential neighborhoods and public facilities. So we want to do some advanced planning, basically to try to take a look at how that neighborhood needs to evolve over the next 10 to 15 years. Here's the strategies based on the map. Rental inspection would be in neighborhood A, which is the areas alongside Mitchell by the hospital, areas over by Madison Jackson, for example. In block group B, we want to have rental inspection plus neighborhood enterprise zone, which provides the ability to incentivize housing rehabilitation. In block group F, we would want rental inspection, NEZ, and the sub-area plan. And then block group G, which would be the neighborhood south of Jennings and east of Standish, you want to take a look at rental inspection. So these would be from a housing quality. These would be the 3 or 4 key kind of strategies that we think the city should start looking at relative to managing the housing stock. So that was the housing quality. The one key component is neighborhood enterprise zone, and I don't want to get into too much into the weeds, but the NEZ basically allows somebody to renovate their property, and the cost of the renovation of if they renovated their kitchen or they expanded a bedroom, excuse me, put in did some significant work to the house like re-roofing, things along those lines. The additional cost that they spent that would go on the tax roll could be abated for a period of time to allow them to recoup the expense of that investment. So this is an incentivized program that is set up around the state because the city has a population of less than 20,000, it doesn't require a housing inspection ordinance. Now, communities over 20,000 that want to use an NEZ, prior to the person getting the certificate, their house would have to be inspected relative to the current housing code. But in here in the city, because we're less than 20,000, we don't have to do that. The certificate applies to rehab and new construction, and it doesn't exceed 12 years based on the total mills collected. So it's a nice program to incentivize the improvement of housing, both rental and owner occupied in neighborhoods. It's got to be somewhat targeted because you cannot exceed 15% of the total acreage of the community. So it can't be community wide, but we could target it into areas that we think that has a good mixture of rental and owner properties where the people could benefit from their certificates.
John, do you need to use those census blocks or we could use other blocks? We could create.
You could do other blocks. The reason why we use the census block, because doing a parcel by parcel analysis or block by block would probably, we could probably do it with having an intern during the summer that spent the time actually going through with a checklist and actually doing an inventory. But without that, or not doing that, we have to rely basically on census data in order to try to come up with those targeted areas. That could be, yeah. How could it be?
How would it be?
Well, we could take a look at. We could take a look at the possibility of block grant funds, but that's I think Shane, that'd have to be through the county,
CDBG money?
the CDBG.
Yeah, if we were awarded one, I've tried to get one in the past and we were not awarded one, but we are going to be receiving $500,000 in MISTA funds for homeowner improvement projects for income qualified folks. So we'll be working with a third party administrator to facilitate those funds in our community over the next few years. So
Yeah.
Yep.
But they're dependent on grants, they won't be a tax break, and there won't be will it be funded at all by taxation, reimbursements or anything like that?
You're talking about NEZs?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it would be. It's a tax abatement incentive.
Yeah, that's a tax incentive. Then the program that you have is.
Yeah, there's no matching,
funds.
funds to that, but the community I grew up in and served in, we have 4 NEZ areas around the city.
Yeah, one of the strategies that some communities use is you can take. I've seen some communities take block grant funds and disperse them throughout the community. And it's beneficial, but they're not targeted, and because of that, you don't get the same impact as when you target those type of funds into a neighborhood along with public investment. That's where you really see a major impact, when you can take funds, either incentive funds like NEZ or funds that Shane got from the state relative for eligible properties, and then include in that street resurfacing, street tree plantings, improvements to a local park. When those all get aggregated together in a neighborhood, it has a significant impact on quality of life. So this is why we did this preliminary assessment, was to start thinking in terms of taking a look at more of a focused approach to neighborhood revitalization. There's some housing statutes, the residential housing districts statute was put in place primarily for units 4 or more, focused on rental. I think this was something that was talked about for the Maple Block as a tax abatement. That's what this is set up for those type of projects. The one that I love that's never rarely used, but I promote the hell out of it, is the Neighborhood Improvement Act, which goes back to 1949. And that's a state statute where the legislative body establishes a neighborhood district, and then the planning commission is tasked with putting together what is referred to as a betterment plan for how to improve the neighborhood using existing capital and infrastructure needs taking a look at existing conditions, targeted housing rehabilitation funds. The beauty of the NIA is that the city also has the authority within the neighborhood after the embetterment plan has been adopted to actually put in place a special assessment district that collects the funds based on the plan to make all of the place-based improvements to the infrastructure, blight elimination, funding things like the inspection services, the rehabilitation services. So seldom used, it's still on the books. Probably, I think, one of the better legislative pieces of public acts that's really focused on neighborhood revitalization. So I put that in there as something maybe we could take a look at as part of the neighborhood improvement program.
John, didn't we utilize that for the Old Town Emmett corridor, the Neighborhood Improvement Act?
That council person, I don't know. I wasn't here when you did that. You may have, I don't know. I rarely find communities using that. So, but if you did, then, you know, that's a good thing. Or did you do just a sub area plan for it?
I think that a lot of that CDBG funding was leveraged on a county and local level for all those concentrated Old Town Emmett improvements. And they did exactly, from what I understand, what you had laid out there in the Neighborhood Improvement Act of 1949.
Okay, I'll explore it with Shane and with Lisa.
I also have another question about that before you move on to historic preservation. Is there also the opportunity for us to look at, like, ward by ward, some of these potential like assessments of, like, for example, any parcel where fires have occurred? And those properties are still sitting vacant, and there's some kind of obstacle to the redevelopment of that. So like a drill down very hyper specifically, parcel by parcel in respective neighborhoods of like the why. And why this is still sitting vacant, and what were some of the obstacles for a potential builder to replace a single family historic home that burned down into a duplex, and what are some of those obstacles that currently exist with the zoning in the context of what you've reviewed earlier this morning about the why that parcel has not been developed, and then applying some of these ideas and suggestions specifically to parts of our neighborhoods.
Yeah, we could take we could take the ward boundaries and overlay them onto some of the analysis that we've done, and then take a deeper dive into particular areas. I think the discussion with the planning commission, but the one thing that I wanted to talk with the council about too is the city has to move from planning into community development. All right, and that's a step. The work that I do for the community is primarily focused on planning issues, zoning, site plans, that I think the one thing that we miss, and we're starting to get there with Shane's help because he's going after the grants, is that like this $500,000 grant is really not a planning initiative, it's a community development.
Mm-hmm.
So you're actually starting to apply different sources of funding to solve and to improve the community, which is a whole different kind of paradigm. It's a shift in terms of how we think. I think planning in Petoskey has been pretty sound overall. I mean, the community does a great job with updating the master plan, doing its 5-year park and recreation plan, its annual capital improvements program, the constant reinvestment in facilities. I think that one of the things that we as a community need to start taking a look at the neighborhood level is the community and economic development potentials and opportunities. And those, like you were getting at, are not necessarily done at the neighborhood level, they're done at the property level. It's property by property.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something that I think is with like I said, with Shane going after some of this money that's available at the state level, it's actually not planning related, it's community development stuff, which is a good thing. Petoskey's got a lot of historic properties. If you go through the master plan, go through the action program, there's just the words preserve and protect come up over and over again. This is not a full list, but this is a list of properties individually or district that are currently on the state and federal register. All right. So you have two districts right now. You got the East Mitchell Street District in downtown Petoskey that were nominated and accepted back in 1986. And since that time, there really hasn't been anything new added to the districts. And that's one of the things that was outlined in the master plan was kind of reactivating the review of areas in the community that would be eligible for historic districts. Now, why I'm a big proponent of historic districts is not necessarily for the regulatory impact. It's primarily for the investment, because if you are an income producing property, and that would be an apartment, it would be a rental property or a commercial property, and you're in a national register district, and if you renovate your property based on the guidelines, the Secretary of Interior guidelines, which I don't feel are extremely onerous, you can apply for a 25% historic investment credit. That's significant when you're talking about a downtown property where they you could reinvest $500,000 on improvements both outside and inside. You do it the correct way with the application, you get 25% of that back as an investment tax credit. I mean, that's huge. Those are the things that I think the historic districts, it's an incentive that's out there that few people are using, and some, or that some of the property owners may not even be aware of, that I think we should take a look at. I threw this slide in because this came up at the planning commission meeting. People always construe a national register district as a regulatory district, and it's not. You have two different types of historic districts. You have a national register district, which is primarily, when it's established, it's recognition or honorific. It's really a recognition that the district is of national historic consequence. And between the state and the federal investment tax credit, you can get upwards of 25% return if you rehabilitate the building based on the guidelines. And that's all the National Register District is set up for. If we created a local historic district, then that's where the regulations come in relative to improvements on the exterior only of the building. And those improvements have to go before a local historic district commission, which is a separate level of review. But I don't want people thinking that if we pursue national register districts, it means that there's additional regulation, because there's not. It's just recognition and its availability to tap into the historic investment credit. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is the Planning Commission work program, and I'm going to kind of at this point turn it over to Charlie.
Well, as John mentioned, there in the Living Petoskey master plan, there are 163 references that the Planning Commission noted for consideration in terms of focusing its work efforts, and that's kind of unwieldy. So we decided to try to categorize those mentions in a couple of major categories, and interestingly enough, corresponding with our focus on zoning review, the zoning ordinance revisions came up 11 times in our count of the master plan in terms of issues, which pushed it to the forefront for the priority of our efforts, which I think is consistent with the general sense that we have. If it's not consistent, we'd certainly love to hear about that from members of the council, because we don't want to end up going down a road that is dead on arrival at the council level. So we're hopeful that we'll get some kind of feedback that this is a correct direction for the Planning Commission's efforts. over the next few months. But interestingly enough, historic preservation had a total of 7 mentions. Intergovernmental cooperation, which we think is keenly important as well, had a total of 4 recommendations, 4 issues mentioned in the master plan. And the housing, which obviously fits into the rest of this zoning issue as well, had 7 mentions as well. We developed over the last several months, we developed this categorization of issues and discussed it at the last planning commission meeting, and had a consensus that this was a good consolidation of our focused efforts for 2024, if we can get to all of it. And in addition to those listed in this slide that he has up there, there are a couple of other smaller categories, including architectural standards, which fits back in again to the zoning discussion, vegetation standards, as well as some other miscellaneous standards. So if you have not had a copy of this in terms of the consolidation categories of the mentions and the focus of the planning commission, it might provide some interesting perspective in terms of the direction that the planning commission is headed. But most important is this entire zoning review for the potential of simplification and consolidation of zoning issues, which is the direction we seem to be headed in that precipitated this joint meeting. So any feedback that we can get from council in terms of the focus of those energies and the appropriateness of those energies would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, the document that Charlie has was approved with a couple of revisions by the planning commission. And it'll be forthcoming on a city council agenda as the official 2024 planning commission work plan. And these are the 4 major categories that are in the work plan, along with the various work tasks. And with that, that's the end of the presentation and kind of the update on where we're at. And I really do appreciate everybody getting together. I think it's worthwhile that we meet as a group and talk through these issues. Mr. City Manager, turn it over to you.
I guess I'll just turn it over to any comment that you want to provide at this time. Obviously, appreciate John's deep dive into this, and you can obviously take back and look at your notes and get back with John and Lisa and myself. Any sort of feedback or direction you'd like to give, but this is kind of an open floor for you to provide any additional comments at this time.
Yeah, if council needs to reach out, feel free to give me a call on my cell. And then also, I do have a City of Petoskey email address that you can email me with questions, or if you've got an interesting article that you want me to take a look at or anything, feel free to email me. Lisa and I are on the phone daily, so I'm always around and available.
A quick request, can the slideshow be posted at the new website?
Yes. Yeah, we'll have a PDF of it.
I think it's great that we're looking at the historic situation. It was kind of
Mayor, will you get your microphone?
in 1986, the city was involved with identifying houses that were on the historic registry due to design, age, and 5 members were appointed by council to look at the historic district. But the situation was, it was all, at that point, it was a total focus was on the downtown. Totally. So all 5 members were basically downtown merchants, building owners. And I think, John, I don't know, I mentioned this, but you mentioned looking at the broader picture to this than just it being a downtown focus on historic districts. As you can see, there are other places in town. So I think that's great that you're looking at expanding that. My compliments to you putting this together, everybody attending. I think this is the way to go. Starts with the planning commission with feedback to city council. as we go, which is great, and us to give feedback to you. I think this is a fantastic process. Hopefully we will avoid what Harbor Springs had. I don't know if you know what Harbor Springs had. What happened was people showed up after the whole fact of everything was done, felt that they weren't included in the process or didn't attend the process. So
Didn't attend.
I think this is a great deal, is that we have this where public can weigh in as we go. And hopefully it'll avoid the front news on the Petoskey News Review of 100 people phoning and coming in with complaints.
That's important for this group right now to understand that Harbor Springs really did a lot of public input access. They really had all their meetings online the same way that you guys do, and they had more than, you know, their opportunities for public engagement. So this, I would say, you know, not to put homework on you, but to understand that throughout this process, as we move through this, as you become more comfortable and educated and fluent in some of these issues, it's gonna be a little bit more public outreach on your shoulders conversationally, to be reaching out and touching base. And I'm not saying knocking on doors necessarily, but as we all know, just having it available to the public doesn't do enough necessarily. And it isn't because Harbor Springs didn't have it available, it just, there wasn't enough engagement all along, so that at the end, you know, they came back and said, oh, that's a secret, whereas in real life, 2 years worth of lots of meetings and, you know, open discussions and joint meetings and things like that. So I will say, kind of be mindful of that as you as individuals and your boards, and in, you know, your conversations over the next couple of months, get more comfortable with some of these concepts, keep talking about them.
Anything else? Anybody else wants to speak? Otherwise,
This is a public meeting, so there is a public comment portion, so we can open the floor.
open for public comment at this point.
Anyone
Thank you
online?
for your comments. That's very important to let us know that we need to be a participant in this, or active participant in this, not just a rubber stamp on this stuff.
Yeah, how do we let people know about the website? Just any ideas, John Anklingsley, you have this great website we're gonna have, but I know people are gonna say, I never knew that.
What are your suggestions?
I don't know, I'm trying to ask.
Does anybody have any suggestions on how there's, when they're reached for the public?
I could work with the city manager, we could put together a press release for the Petoskey News saying that council and planning commission got together as a kickoff, and then one of the things that came out of it is project website on the new zone code. We could have I have to rely on the manager to do the PR on that. I mean, I could help with the press, but I'm thinking maybe that's.
I think a press release would be great, you know, and no matter what we do, there are always gonna be people that have to call that are going to.
It's human nature.
Yeah,
Or don't wanna listen.
well, people are busy.
Here's what don't listen.
So it affects them directly, they often don't want to get involved.
Yeah, you know, the one thing that Andrea brought up about Harbor. They had 22 meetings, 3 open houses. That was just at the planning commission level. They had 4 or 5 presentations at city council, which is on Zoom. The Harbor Light did a great job of covering every aspect of it, but there's an underlying issue over there, and it has less to do with zoning. More with the RRC program. There's people over in Harbor that feel that the redevelopment ready program is, I hate to say it, they feel it's a conspiracy by the state to take over local zoning and planning in communities. So, I mean, Andrea's been at the meetings. We sit there and people get up and they have the RRC guidelines and shaking them, and they say that this is Governor Whitmer's opportunity to take over Harbor Springs. So there's some other underlying things going on over there, not because they didn't have an open process. They, like I said, 22 meetings, 3 open houses, and countless presentations to council. So we're going to end up, I mean, it's going to happen here too. As much as we try to make it transparent, when we get towards the end, somebody's going to say that they weren't aware of what we were doing, and they're going to have concerns.
John, in terms of communication through the website, would it be possible to either have a blog or a news feature there that could periodically update the public in terms of what's happening, as opposed to just the press release at the beginning.
Yeah, what I was thinking,
And or an ability for them to sign up for email
if
distribution.
they send us their email, then we can harvest it.
Right, but you might make that
Yeah.
a category there, sign up, and then we can push it out to them as developed.
The other part that I want to do is, once we're done, I want to get the Zoom recording from Lisa and post that on there too, so people can go and take a look at the previous meetings.
Great.
Also having billing, we can include that to the ship exchange, yeah,
I'm sorry, what was?
we can include it in our water and electric billing that we send out to people as an attachment. I mean, we do that with the spring and fall cleanups.
Mhm.
Here's the dates that it's gonna happen. We can at least tell them, here's the website spot and here's a blog where you want.
Yeah.
I see a note that Nikki Devitt
Yeah.
offered the chamber will help in any way they can. So
Okay.
I appreciate all the fact-based approach, the creative way to use census information and analyze that. And Charlie, your summary with the focus areas, totally aligned. Great job.
Mr. Moore.
I just think the idea that Charlie presented of having people be able to sign up for an email outreach is a really good idea. I do an email outreach to Ward 1. It's simple. It brings the information to people. It seems that they really appreciate it. So giving people that opportunity to sign up for some form of outreach as opposed to them having to go to different sites to find it, I think is a good idea. Thank you.
Mr. Petty.
I just wanted to say I hadn't seen this emails and I agree. It's really great.
Anyone else?
I just want to thank the planning commission for the time and going in this route, going this direction and say for where I said, yes, you are in the right direction. Going in the right direction, and I appreciate the time. I think there is political will and community will for these changes. So I look forward to working alongside y'all. Thank you.
Anyone else?
We do have public.
Please hold on for me. Who is it?
Albert Moss.
That's Mr. Moss. Have the floor. Al Moss.
Can you hear me?
We have you, Albert, yes.
I understand our housing needs, and I think a lot of the stuff that works, that you have is just great, especially rehabbing a lot of the RM2, RM1 districts, even R3, which has duplexes and stuff in it right now, and making the city better is great. I am concerned a little bit about anything that erodes housing in our traditional R1, R2 districts, especially the concept of triplexes and quadplexes in those districts. Because I kind of believe the heart of Petoskey is those homeowners that have made a lifelong commitment to Petoskey and invested money in Petoskey. You've already done a lot of work on R1 and R2 when you did the ADU ordinance. It changed from previously saying that R1 are single family residential, R1 and R2 are single family residential districts designed to be the most restrictive of the residential districts. The intent is to provide for an environment of predominantly low density, one family attached dwellings, along with other residential facilities. In 2022, Ordinance 787 changed that to where we have follow the primary historical development pattern of single family, primary single family detached dwellings with 2-unit dwellings and limited use of accessory dwellings. So that already said, that was already erosion. That already says that you can put now 2-unit dwellings in R1 and R2. And I just think we have to have a good balance. You know, the census data from 2018 to 2022 estimates that there are 2,583 housing units, of which 56.8%, or about 1,477, are owner occupied. So this indicates that there's about 1,107 households currently living in non-owner occupied housing. And I assume that most of this non-owner occupied housing is rental housing, which there's nothing wrong with. We have long-term rental residents, and I don't want to disrespect them at all. I'm just saying that's just a part of what we already have. Over the past 3 or 4 years, and I probably don't have all of them, but we've got the Loft of Lumber Yard that gives us 60 units. Maple Block will give us 200 units. 424 Emmett has the potential of 12 units. City Park Grill is 6 units. So we have a total of 278 potential new rental households. And this is a increase of approximately 1,107 owner occupied households to 1,385. This will be over a 25% increase in non-owner occupied housing. The city of Petoskey, I think, should let these projects come to fruition before we start looking at any more than a duplex in R1 and R2. And also, I think it's important that I don't understand, it'll be important as you look at rewriting, if you're rewriting these, to not have the language too ambiguous. So if you go back to what that article says, it says now for R1 and R2, the intent is to continue the historical pattern of primarily single-family detached housing. What does primarily mean? Is that 51% or is that 99%? And then 2-unit detached dwellings following that historical pattern. So does that mean we count how many 2-unit dwellings are currently in R1 and R2 and not let that expand much? I just think that needs to be clarified. I really appreciate the work you're doing. I know it's tough. We do need housing. We have housing going. I just don't want to swing that pendulum too far the other way. Very great and interesting discussion this morning. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. There's one other person up there, Karen.
Karen,
Yes, can you hear me?
please.
Okay, this is Karen for Kirky at 1104 Preby in Petoskey. And my idea was just what John said, that I think you should put something in the utility bills so everybody is aware. It just has to be a 1-page simplified thing to tell them where to go. Because when I talk to people and tell them sometimes what's on the commission's agenda, people have no idea. And that's where you run into the problem that you did in Harbor Springs. People just are not aware and don't know. So I think to help alleviate all saying that people never knew and then complaining afterwards, if you just put a 1-page summary of where they can go to, kind of what it's all about, and it wouldn't cost any more in postage to put one more piece of paper in there. And I think that would be a great idea for the community.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? No. Anyone else? Mr. Moore, you had your hand up before I called on Mr. Fedek. Did you have anything to say? No. Anyone else in the commission or the council wish to speak? For further business to come before us, I call this meeting adjourned. Have a good day. Enjoy the sun.